Brad Hoffman pushed through the crowd outside Buckingham Palace, his phone already recording. The 28-year-old from Dallas had built his social media following on one simple rule: the more outrageous, the better. His TikTok account, Brad Goes Bad, had 3 million followers who loved watching him push boundaries and break rules across Europe. "What's up, followers?" he shouted into his phone, ignoring the annoyed looks from other tourists. "We're here at the Queen's house, and I'm about to show these British guys how we do things in America." The red uniformed guards stood perfectly still at their posts. Brad had researched them before coming. He knew they weren't supposed to move or react, no matter what tourists did. That made them perfect targets for his content. "These guys are like statues," he announced to his camera. "Let's see if we can get them to crack." His girlfriend Sarah grabbed his arm. "Brad, maybe we should just take normal pictures like everyone else." "Normal doesn't get views, babe," Brad replied, shaking her off. "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." The crowd around them grew thicker as the changing of the guard ceremony approached. Brad noticed several people filming with their phones, hoping to catch something interesting. Perfect. More witnesses meant more chances for his video to go viral. He walked closer to the nearest guard, a tall man with a stern face, hidden partly by his famous black hat. The guard's eyes stared straight ahead, not acknowledging Brad's presence. "This dude's not even real," Brad said loudly, getting laughs from some teenagers nearby. They probably hired actors because the real guards are too scared to deal with Americans. Sarah looked embarrassed. "Brad, please. People are staring." "Good," Brad grinned. "That's the whole point." He'd done this kind of thing before. In Paris, he'd climbed the barriers at the Eiffel Tower. In Rome, he'd tried to touch ancient statues. Each stunt brought him thousands of new followers and sponsorship deals. His last video, where he'd argued with Italian police, got 2 million views in one day. But something felt different here. The guards seemed more alert than the ones he'd messed with before. His jaw was tighter, his posture more rigid. Brad noticed a small muscle twitching in the man's cheek. "I bet he's dying to move," Brad told his camera. "These British guys are probably not used to real Americans who don't bow down to their weird royal stuff." The crowd was getting restless. More phones came out as people sensed something was about to happen. Brad felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before his best content. He stepped even closer to the guard, now just 2 feet away. The man's breathing was controlled, but Brad could see his nostrils flaring slightly. "What's wrong, buddy?" Brad taunted. "Cat got your tongue?" That's when he noticed the guard's hand. It was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from what looked like controlled anger. The man's knuckles were white where he gripped his rifle. Brad's follower count was probably climbing right now as people shared his live stream. The comments were flying by too fast to read, but he caught words like crazy and amazing and "this guy's insane." He was about to take another step forward when he saw something that made him pause. Another guard, positioned about 20 feet away, had turned his head slightly to look at them. That wasn't supposed to happen. These guys never broke character. "Oh, now we're getting somewhere," Brad whispered to his camera, but something in his voice had changed. For the first time, he wondered if he might be getting in over his. The guard who had made eye contact with the one Brad was harassing. It lasted only a second, but Brad caught it. Some kind of signal had just passed between them. "Did you guys see that?" Brad asked his camera excitedly. "They're actually communicating. I'm breaking their programming." But Sarah noticed what Brad missed. More guards were paying attention now. Their eyes weren't wandering randomly. They were all focused on Brad. She counted at least 5 who had shifted their attention to her boyfriend's performance. "Brad, I think we should go," Sarah whispered urgently. "Are you kidding? This is just getting good." Brad was high on the attention. His live view counter showed over 50,000 people watching. Comments flooded in from around the world. He decided to up the stakes. Brad pulled out a small American flag from his backpack, a prop he'd brought specifically for this moment. He began waving it dramatically near the guard's face. "USA! USA!" he chanted, trying to get the crowd involved. Some tourists laughed nervously, but others started backing away. The guard's breathing changed. Sarah could see his chest rising and falling faster now. His face remained expressionless, but a red flush was creeping up his neck. "Look at his face," Brad announced to his audience. "He's getting mad. These guys aren't as tough as they pretend to be." An older British woman in the crowd shook her head disapprovingly. "Disgraceful." She muttered loud enough for others to hear. Brad heard her and spun around. "Disgraceful? Lady, this is called freedom of expression. Maybe you've heard of it?" The woman's husband stepped forward protectively. "You're being disrespectful to our traditions, young man." "Your traditions?" Brad laughed mockingly. "You mean standing around like mannequins while tourists take pictures? Real impressive tradition there, Grandpa." More people were getting on. Parents started pulling their children away from the scene, but just as many were taking out their phones, sensing drama. Brad turned back to the guard and made his biggest mistake yet. He reached out and waved his hand directly in front of the man's face, coming within inches of touching him. "Hello? Anybody home in there?" The guard's jaw muscle twitched violently. His eyes, which had been staring straight ahead, flickered down to Brad's face for just a moment. It was the first crack in his composure. "Oh my God, did you see that?" Brad shouted to his camera. "He looked at me! I'm actually getting to this guy!" Sarah grabbed Brad's sleeve harder. "Something's wrong. Look around us." Brad finally looked up from his phone screen. The atmosphere had changed completely. What started as a fun crowd watching a silly American tourist had turned into something much more tense. British people in the crowd looked genuinely angry now. Security cameras that he hadn't noticed before seemed to be pointing directly at him, and the guards, all of them that he could see, were no longer staring into the distance. They were watching him. "Maybe we should," Sarah started to say. "No way," Brad cut her off. "This is perfect. Look at my viewer count. 60,000 people are watching this live. I'm about to go mega viral." He turned back to the guard with renewed confidence. But as he got closer, he noticed something that made his stomach drop slightly. The man's hand was no longer trembling. It was completely steady now, gripping his rifle with professional control. The guard's eyes met Brad's directly. Not by accident this time, deliberately. And in those eyes, Brad saw something he'd never encountered in all his stunts across Europe. Genuine, controlled fury. Followers," Brad said, his voice less confident than before. "I think this guy might actually," the guard spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but carried clearly across the courtyard. "Step back, sir." The crowd went silent. Even Brad's phone seemed to capture the sudden tension in the air. This wasn't part of the show anymore. This was about to become something much more serious. The guard's words hung in the air like a challenge. Brad's live stream exploded with comments as 65,000 viewers realized they might be watching something historic. "Did he just talk?" Brad asked his camera, trying to keep his voice light. "I didn't think they were allowed to do that." But the excitement in his voice sounded forced now. The guard's direct stare was unnerving in a way Brad hadn't experienced before. This man wasn't just doing a job. He looked personally offended. "I said step back," the guard repeated, louder this time. His accent was crisp, military precise. "This is your only warning." Sarah tugged on Brad's shirt. "He's serious. Please, let's just go take pictures somewhere else." The crowd had formed a wider circle now. Some people were filming, but others looked worried. A few parents had already left with their children. Brad's ego wouldn't let him back down. 70,000 viewers now. This was already his biggest live stream ever, and it was only getting bigger. His follower count was climbing in real time. "Warning?" Brad laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Dude, I'm a tourist. I paid money to be here. You can't threaten paying customers." He held up his American passport dramatically. "See this? This means I have rights, even in your little kingdom here." The guard's expression didn't change, but his partner 20 feet away had now turned fully to face them. Two more guards that Sarah could see had shifted their positions slightly. The coordination was subtle but unmistakable. "Brad," Sarah whispered urgently, "look around. Really look." For the first time, Brad took his eyes off his phone screen and actually observed his surroundings. British tourists in the crowd were no longer just annoyed. They looked genuinely angry. An elderly man was speaking quietly into his phone, probably calling someone. Security personnel in civilian clothes had appeared at the edges of the crowd. But his viewer count kept climbing. 75,000. Comments were flying by so fast they were just a blur of text. "This is insane," Brad said to his camera, but his voice cracked slightly. "They're all getting worked up over nothing. I'm just having some fun." The guard spoke again, and this time his voice carried a authority that made even confident Brad pause. "Sir, you are disrupting a military ceremony and showing disrespect to the crown. Move away from this post immediately." "Military ceremony?" Brad forced another laugh. "You're standing there like a statue. That's not a ceremony. That's a tourist attraction." The words were barely out of his mouth when he realized he'd made a serious error. The guard's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Around the courtyard, other guards had stopped their normal routines. All attention was focused on this one spot. An older British man in the crowd called out, "Show some respect, you ignorant fool." "Respect?" Brad spun around, his phone still recording. "For what? For some guy in a costume pretending to be important?" The crowd's mood shifted dramatically. What had been uncomfortable murmuring became open hostility. British voices called out, "Disgraceful! Bloody tourist! Throw him out!" Sarah was pulling on Brad's arm now. "We need to leave, now. This isn't funny anymore." But Brad was trapped by his own success. 80,000 viewers. The comments were going crazy. His phone was overheating from the streaming. This was the kind of viral moment that creators dreamed of. He turned back to the guard, who hadn't moved a muscle during the crowd's outburst. The man's composure was almost inhuman, but Brad could see the storm building behind his eyes. "You know what?" Brad said, stepping closer again. "I think you're just scared. All this tough guy act, but you're not allowed to do anything. You have to stand there and take it while a real man shows you up." The words came out before Brad fully thought them through. He was playing to his audience now, feeding off their energy through the screen. The guard's response was quiet, but it carried clearly across the courtyard. "Sir, you have 10 seconds to step away from this post." "Or what?" Brad challenged, his phone held high. "You'll tell on me? Call your mommy?" The guard began counting. 10. Sarah grabbed Brad's arm with both hands. "He's counting down! Brad, he's actually counting!" 9. The crowd went silent. Even the background noise of London traffic seemed to fade. 8. Brad's bravado was cracking, but he couldn't back down now. Not with 85,000 people watching. 7. His phone was shaking slightly in his hand. 6. 5. Brad's mouth went dry. The guard's countdown wasn't a bluff. It was a promise. But with 90,000 people watching live, backing down would destroy his reputation. His entire brand was built on never giving in. 4. Sarah was practically crying now. "Brad, please, just say you're sorry." 3. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the other tourists stopped taking pictures. Everyone was holding their breath. 2. Brad's hands were shaking, but he forced himself to stay put. This was it, the moment that would define his entire career. 1. The guard's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Last chance." Brad raised his phone higher and smiled at the camera. "You hear that, everyone? He thinks he's intimidating me. But we Americans don't back down from." He never finished the sentence. The guard moved faster than Brad thought possible. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward and brought his white-gloved hand across Brad's face in a sharp, precise slap that echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. The impact sent Brad stumbling backward, his phone flying from his hand. It clattered across the stone pavement, but kept recording, now showing a sideways view of the shocked crowd. Brad stood there for a moment, his hand pressed to his cheek, completely stunned. The livestream counter showed 95,000 viewers, all watching the aftermath of the slap heard around the world. You can't do that," Brad stammered, his voice high and shaky. "That's assault. I'm an American citizen." The guard had already returned to his original position, standing perfectly still as if nothing had happened. But his eyes remained fixed on Brad, and there was no mistaking the message. "Try me again." Sarah rushed to grab Brad's phone from the ground, the screen showing thousands of comments flooding in faster than ever. The viewer count hit 100,000 and kept climbing. "Brad, we need to leave right now," she whispered urgently, but her voice was picked up by the phone's microphone. Other guards around the courtyard had moved closer. Not obviously, but Brad suddenly realized he was surrounded by men in red uniforms who all looked like they approved of what had just happened. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some tourists looked shocked, but many of the British people were actually smiling. A few even started clapping. "About time someone shut him up," called out the elderly man who'd been complaining earlier. "Serves him right," agreed his wife. Brad's face was burning, both from the slap and from humiliation. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the hero of his own story, the fearless American showing up the stuffy British. Instead, he'd been publicly humiliated in front of 100,000 people and counting. "You can't just hit people," Brad shouted, but his voice cracked. "This isn't the Middle Ages. There are laws." The guard who had slapped him spoke again, his voice calm and professional. "You were warned multiple times to maintain proper distance and show respect. You chose to ignore those warnings and make physical gestures near a Queen's Guard. That constitutes a threat to royal security." "A threat?" Brad's voice went even higher. "I was just goofing around." "Your goofing around ended the moment you ignored a direct order from Her Majesty's Guard," the man replied. "You are now trespassing and creating a public disturbance." Sarah was pulling on Brad's sleeve again, but he was too angry and embarrassed to think clearly. His cheek was throbbing, and he could taste blood where he'd bitten his tongue. "This is bullshit," he yelled. "I want to speak to your supervisor. I want to speak to the American embassy. You people can't treat American tourists like this." More guards were arriving now. Not rushing, but walking with purpose toward the scene. Brad counted at least 8 red uniforms converging on his location. The crowd was getting bigger too. Word was spreading that something major had happened. Phones were everywhere, all pointed at Brad. His own phone, still in Sarah's hands, showed the viewer count had passed 120,000. This was going to be the most watched live stream in his channel's history. But instead of feeling victorious, Brad felt scared for the first time since arriving in London. The guard who had slapped him took a step closer. "Sir, you need to leave these premises immediately. If you refuse, you will be arrested for disturbing the peace and disrespecting the crown." Brad looked around desperately. The other tourists were backing away from him. Even Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear. "Fine," he shouted. "We'll leave, but this isn't over. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue this whole country." As he turned to go, the guard spoke one last time. "Sir?" Brad turned back hopefully, thinking maybe the man was going to apologize. Instead, the guard smiled coldly and said, "God save the Queen." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Brad's humiliation was complete, but as he walked away with Sarah, he didn't realize that his problems were just beginning. Sarah finally managed to get Brad away from the palace, but not before his phone captured every second of their humiliating retreat. The comments were exploding faster than the app could display them, and the viewer count had reached 150,000. "Give me my phone back," Brad demanded once they were a safe distance away. "Brad, maybe you should stop streaming for now," Sarah suggested, but she handed it over anyway. Brad looked at the screen and his eyes widened. Not only were the numbers huge, but the video was already being shared across every social media platform. Someone had screen recorded the slap, and it was spreading like wildfire. "Holy shit," he breathed. "Look at this." Within minutes, Brad Gets Slapped was trending on Twitter. TikTok was flooded with reaction videos. Instagram stories showed the clip being shared thousands of times per minute. Brad's initial shock began wearing off, replaced by the intoxicating rush of viral fame. "This is insane. I'm famous." But Sarah was reading the comments more carefully than Brad was. While some people thought it was funny, others were calling Brad names she'd never heard before. And they weren't just Americans making fun of him. People from around the world were piling on. "Brad, maybe you should read these comments," she said quietly. "I don't have time to read comments," Brad replied, still high on adrenaline. "I need to capitalize on this. This is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me." He immediately started planning his next move. Follow-up videos, interviews, maybe even a book deal. He could see dollar signs everywhere. But as they walked through London, people started recognizing him. At first, it was just pointing and whispering. Then someone yelled out, "Hey, it's the American idiot who got slapped." More phones came out. Brad was being filmed everywhere he went now, but not in the way he wanted. These weren't fans. They were people documenting his embarrassment for their own social media. This is actually good, Brad told Sarah, trying to convince himself as much as her. Any publicity is good publicity, right? Sarah wasn't so sure. The comments on his live stream were getting nastier by the minute. People were posting his full name, his home address in Dallas, even his parents' phone numbers. Brad, people are doxing you, she said, showing him the screen. What's doxing? They're posting all your personal information online. Look. Brad finally stopped walking and really looked at his phone. Mixed in with the viral fame were thousands of people calling him everything from disrespectful trash to much worse. His parents were already getting angry phone calls from strangers. The Dallas Morning News had picked up the story. CNN was running the clip on their website. The BBC was calling it a disgraceful display of American tourist behavior. Wait, Brad said, his excitement fading. They're not making me famous. They're making me the villain. What did you expect? Sarah asked. You disrespected their military in front of their own people. Brad hadn't thought about it that way. In his mind, he was just creating content. He never considered that the guard was a real person with real feelings, or that the ceremony meant something to the British people watching. His phone rang. It was his manager from Dallas. Brad, what the hell did you do? The voice on the other end was angry. I've got 3 sponsors wanting to cancel your contracts. The hotel chain is threatening to sue. This is a disaster. But look at the views, Brad protested. I'm trending worldwide. You're trending as the ugly American tourist who embarrassed our entire country. Do you know how bad this makes you look? Brad was starting to realize that viral fame wasn't always good fame. As they kept walking through London, more people recognized. But instead of asking for selfies, they were making disgusted faces and filming him for their own mockery videos. A group of British teenagers spotted him and started chanting, "Slap him again! Slap him again!" Maybe we should go back to the hotel, Sarah suggested. But when they arrived at their hotel, there were already reporters waiting in the lobby. Not entertainment reporters looking for a fun interview. Serious news reporters who wanted to ask Brad about American tourist behavior and whether he understood the cultural significance of what he'd done. Mr. Hoffman, called out a reporter with a BBC badge, do you have any comment about your disrespectful behavior toward Her Majesty's Guard? Brad tried to push past them, but more questions came flying. Do you think this represents American values? Will you be apologizing to the British people? Are you aware that your actions have caused an international incident? International incident? Brad stopped walking. What do you mean, international incident? The reporter smiled grimly. The U.S. ambassador to the U.K. has been asked to comment on your behavior. This story is leading news broadcasts in 12 countries now. Brad felt his stomach drop. This was way bigger than he'd intended. He'd wanted to go viral, but not like this. As they finally made it to their room, Sarah turned on the TV. There was Brad's face on every news channel, with headlines like, American Tourist's Shameful Display and The Slap Heard Round the World. But the worst part was yet to come. His phone rang again. This time it was his mother. Bradley James Hoffman, what on earth were you thinking? Brad's mother's voice came through the phone loud enough for Sarah to hear every word. She only used his full name when he was in serious trouble. Mom, I can explain. Explain? Your father and I just watched you humiliate yourself and our entire family on national television. The neighbors are calling. Your grandmother is crying. Do you have any idea what you've done? Brad sank into the hotel room chair. Through the window, he could see protesters gathering outside. British people holding signs that read, "Respect our traditions" and "Americans go home." It was just supposed to be a fun video, he said weakly. Fun? His mother's voice cracked. Bradley, you've been banned from Buckingham Palace for life. The British government has filed a formal complaint with our State Department. Your behavior is being discussed in Congress. Sarah showed him her laptop screen. The story was indeed every major news outlet in America was covering it. But they weren't treating Brad like a celebrity. They were treating him like a national embarrassment. Fox News, American tourists' disgraceful behavior embarrasses nation. CNN, when social media stunts go too far. MSNBC, The Ugly American, a case study in cultural disrespect. Mom, I didn't know it would. Would what? That disrespecting another country's military would have consequences? That making a fool of yourself in front of the world would matter? The hotel room phone rang. Sarah answered it. Mr. Hoffman? This is the front desk. We need you to come down immediately. The police are here to speak with you. Brad's blood ran cold. The police? Bradley, his mother's voice came through his cell phone. Are you in trouble with the police now? I'll call you back, Mom. He hung up and looked at Sarah. What do I do? You go talk to them, she said. And you better hope they just want to ask questions. The elevator ride down felt like the longest of Brad's life. In the lobby, 2 British police officers were waiting, along with the hotel manager who looked extremely unhappy. Mr. Hoffman? The older officer stepped forward. I'm Constable Williams. We need to discuss the incident at Buckingham Palace. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but we've received multiple complaints about your conduct. The Palace Guard has filed a report, and we have dozens of witnesses. The hotel manager cleared his throat. Mr. Hoffman, I'm afraid I have to ask you to check out immediately. Your presence here is disturbing our other guests. You're kicking us out? The hotel has received over 300 complaint calls since the video went viral. We can't maintain a safe environment with you here. Brad looked around the lobby. Other hotel guests were staring and whispering. Some were taking pictures with their phones. Constable Williams continued, You won't be charged with assault, as the guard's actions were within his authority. However, you are being issued a formal trespass warning for all royal properties. You're also facing possible charges for disturbing the peace. But I'm a tourist. I have rights. You have the right to behave respectfully while visiting our country, the younger officer replied sternly, which you failed to do. Sarah had packed their bags and brought them down. I found us another hotel across town, she whispered to Brad. As they left the first hotel, they walked into a crowd of reporters and angry protesters. Cameras flashed everywhere. Questions were shouted from all directions. Brad, do you regret your actions? Will you apologize to the British people? Are you embarrassed to be American right now? That last question hit Brad hard. For the first time, he really looked at the signs the protesters were holding. They weren't just angry at him personally, they were angry at Americans in general. Great job representing your country, mate, yelled one protester sarcastically. Is this what American values look like? Shouted another. Brad realized he'd become the face of everything people hated about American tourists. Loud, disrespectful, thinking rules didn't apply to them. The taxi ride to their new hotel was silent except for Brad's phone constantly buzzing with notifications. Death threats were mixed in with interview requests. His social media follower count was indeed climbing, but so were the people telling him he was a disgrace to his country. I think I need to make an apology video, Brad said quietly. You think? Sarah replied, her voice colder than it had been all day. Brad looked at her and realized she was angry too. Not just embarrassed, actually angry. Sarah? Do you know what the worst part is, Brad? What? You still don't get it. You're not sorry for what you did. You're just sorry you got caught. You're sorry it didn't go the way you planned. She was right, and Brad knew it. Even now, part of him was calculating how to turn this into positive publicity. That guard was a real person doing his job, Sarah continued. Those weren't actors or props for your entertainment. They were human beings with feelings and pride in what they do. Brad stared out the taxi window as they drove through London. For the first time, he really saw the city instead of just seeing it as a backdrop for his content. Historic buildings that had stood for centuries. Monuments to people who died for their country. Traditions that meant something to millions of people. And he'd treated it all like a joke for social media views. I think I'm starting to understand, he said quietly. But understanding was only the beginning. The real question was whether it was too late to make things right. The second hotel wasn't much better than the first. Word had spread about who they were, and staff members kept giving Brad dirty looks. The new room had a view of the protests that were still growing outside the first hotel. Sarah sat on the bed with her laptop, scrolling through the endless coverage of Brad's humiliation. It's getting worse, she said. Some American politicians are calling for you to be prosecuted. They're saying you've damaged diplomatic relations. Brad was staring at his phone, finally reading through the thousands of comments in detail. For every person defending him, There were 50 calling him everything from pathetic to a national disgrace. But the comments that hurt most were from other Americans. This idiot doesn't represent us. Embarrassed to share a country with this moron. Hope they ban him from coming back home too. I need to fix this, Brad said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. How? You can't unfail to respect their traditions. You can't unslap yourself. Brad's phone rang. It was his manager again. Brad, it's over. All your sponsors have dropped you. The hotel chain is suing for breach of contract. 3 different companies want to sue you for damaging American tourism. And TikTok is considering suspending your account for violating community standards. But the views don't matter if no one wants to work with you. Do you understand? Your career is finished. After hanging up, Brad sat in silence for several minutes. Everything he'd built over 3 years was gone. But worse than that, he'd become exactly what he'd always claimed to be fighting against, a joke. What if I made a real apology, he asked Sarah. What kind of apology? Not just saying sorry, actually showing I understand what I did wrong. Sarah looked at him carefully. Do you understand? Brad thought about the guard's face when he'd been mocking him. The man had shown incredible restraint. In any other situation, someone might have hit Brad much sooner and much harder. He was doing his job, Brad said slowly. It wasn't entertainment. It was his actual job, protecting something important. And I treated him like he wasn't a real person, like he was just a prop for my content. Sarah nodded. What else? Brad continued, working through it. I made Americans look bad. I made us look like we don't respect other cultures. Because I don't. I didn't. I thought being American meant I could do whatever I wanted anywhere in the world. It was the first honest thing Brad had said since the incident. So what are you going to do about it? Brad opened his laptop and started typing. Not a script for a video, but a real letter. He wrote to the guard he disrespected, even though he didn't know the man's name. He wrote to the British people. He wrote to his fellow Americans. The letter was 3 pages long. He deleted it and started over, then deleted that and started again. Finally, after 2 hours, he had something that felt genuine. I want to read this to you, he told Sarah. The letter acknowledged everything. His arrogance, his disrespect, his complete failure to understand what he was doing. But more than that, it talked about what he'd learned. I thought being proud of being American meant thinking we were better than everyone else, he read aloud. But real American values are about respecting others, even when we disagree, especially when we disagree. Sarah listened to the whole thing. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. It's good, she said finally. But Brad? Yeah? Actions matter more than words. Anyone can write an apology. She was right. The letter was just the beginning. Brad posted the written apology on all his social media accounts, but he didn't stop there. He researched the history of the Queen's Guard. He learned about their training, their service, their sacrifices. He found out that many of them were combat veterans who'd served in Afghanistan and Iraq. The guard who had slapped him was named James Mitchell. He'd served 3 tours of duty and lost friends in combat. Standing guard at Buckingham Palace wasn't just a job. It was an honor. Brad made a video, not his usual high-energy content, but a simple, honest conversation about what he'd learned. He talked about privilege and respect and what it really meant to represent your country abroad. The video got fewer views than his usual content, but the comments were different. People were actually listening. Then Brad did something that surprised everyone, including Sarah. He bought a plane ticket back to London. Are you insane? Sarah asked. They'll probably arrest you at the airport. Maybe, Brad replied, but I need to apologize in person, to him specifically. They won't let you near the palace. I know, but I have to try. 2 weeks later, Brad stood outside Buckingham Palace again, not as a cocky American tourist looking for content, but as someone who had learned what humility felt like. He couldn't get close to the guards, of course. Security had been tripled around him specifically, but he could see them from a distance. And one of them, Brad was pretty sure it was James Mitchell, turned his head slightly and nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't friendship, but it was acknowledgement. Sometimes that's enough to start over. Brad's follower count never recovered to what it had been. His influencer career was essentially finished, but for the first time in years, he was proud of who he was becoming instead of who he was pretending to be. And that was worth more than all the viral fame in the world.